Memory is a locked room, but the key was never lost. It was simply waiting in the wrong hands. The story is being written in this very moment. The first thing she noticed was the ceiling. It was not her ceiling. Hermione knew her ceiling the way she knew the arrangement of books on her nightstand. Intimately, unconsciously, the way the mind catalogues the unremarkable details of a life lived alone. Her ceiling had a hairline fracture running northeast from the light fixture, a remnant of the structural settling she'd meant to have repaired for 3 years and never did. It was familiar. It was hers. This ceiling was smooth, cream-coloured and entirely foreign. A single chandelier hung at its centre. Small, brass, the kind found in mid-range wizarding hotels that were trying slightly too hard at elegance. The curtains were drawn, but pale morning light pressed insistently through the gap between them, laying a thin gold line across the duvet like a marker on a map. She stared at it for 4 full seconds before the rest of the information reached her. The pillow beneath her head smelled of something she didn't recognize. Something cool and faintly sharp, like cedar and stone. And underneath it, the ghost of expensive cologne wearing thin toward morning. The sheets were heavy, white, faintly warm in a way that had nothing to do with the room temperature. The mattress had a slight depression to her left. To her left. She turned her head. The breath left her body as though she'd been pressed flat. Draco Malfoy was asleep 6 inches away from her. He was lying on his back, one arm folded across his stomach, the other extended slightly toward her side of the bed, not touching, but close enough that the fine hairs on her forearm registered the proximity before her mind caught up. His face in sleep was startling in its stillness. The habitual tension she had always associated with him, the slight compression of his mouth, the vertical crease between his brows, the perpetual readiness for cruelty or performance, all of it had dissolved. What remained was something that had no right to look as peaceful as it did. His hair had fallen slightly across his forehead, silver blonde, dishevelled in a way she was absolutely certain no living person had witnessed and survived to discuss. He was wearing a white dress shirt, collar open, the top 3 buttons undone. One sleeve was rolled to the elbow. The other had come partially undone and gaped at his wrist. She was wearing, Hermione looked down, her own dress from the night before. The deep burgundy one she'd chosen for the ministry gala. Still on, still mostly intact, though the small clasp at the back had come undone. She could feel the absence of it between her shoulder blades. She sat up very slowly, as though sudden movement might trigger something catastrophic. The room assembled itself around her in increments. A hotel room, unquestionably. Compact, tastefully appointed, the kind of anonymous luxury that existed in the Wizarding Quarter near Diagon Alley. A small writing desk in the corner. 2 chairs angled toward a cold fireplace. A bottle on the low table between them. Dark glass, the label facing away. 2 glasses, both used, one tipped on its side. Her clutch bag on the floor near the foot of the bed, clasp open, her wand visible inside it, thank Merlin, along with a folded paper, lavender tinged, the colour the hotel used for room service notes. Her heels were placed with strange neatness beside the wardrobe, together, toes pointing outward. She had not done that. She was not, in her natural state, a person who placed her shoes neatly. She was a person who stepped out of them and left them where they fell. Someone else had placed them there. Her eyes moved back to Draco Malfoy, asleep in the bed she had apparently shared with him, and she felt the first tremor of something that was not quite panic and not quite fascination move through her like a struck bell still vibrating. She needed to think. She needed, more urgently, to remember. The Ministry Gala. Yes, she had that. The atrium of the Ministry of Magic, transformed for the annual reconstruction benefit. 10 years post-war, and they still held it, as if celebration could be retroactive. White flowers, enchanted to float at shoulder height. The string quartet playing in the corner that nobody listened to. Champagne that refilled itself in the glass if you didn't watch carefully. She remembered arriving with Ginny, who had disappeared within 20 minutes in the direction of a group of Quidditch officials. She remembered the minister shaking her hand and saying something complimentary about her most recent paper. She remembered the moment her glass had been replaced with something different, darker, aromatic, by a passing waiter, and she had drunk it without really registering the change because she had been in the middle of a sentence with Kingsley. And then she reached for what came after and found the surface of her memory strangely smooth there. Not blank exactly, more like a photograph left in sunlight. The image faded to near transparency, shapes still present, but detail dissolved. She had a sense of noise, of laughter, of warmth, of the evening tilting slightly on its axis in some way she couldn't yet identify. And then this ceiling. "You're staring." The voice came without warning, low and unhurried, and she startled so violently that she nearly toppled off her side of the bed. She caught herself on one hand, heart crashing against her ribs, and turned to find that Draco Malfoy had not moved a single inch. His eyes were open, fixed on the chandelier above them, his expression entirely unreadable. "You're awake," she said, which was not the sentence she had intended to produce. Evidently. A pause. He still hadn't looked at her. "How long have you been sitting there?" 30 seconds. A minute. I was trying to remember where I was. "And now that you've remembered?" "I haven't," she said. "That's rather the problem." Something shifted in his profile. Not quite a reaction, more the shadow of one, the almost movement of a muscle in his jaw. "No," he said quietly. "I haven't either." The admission sat between them, unexpectedly leveling. She had prepared herself in the 30 seconds before he opened his eyes for the blade of his voice, the practiced contempt, the first defensive strike. She had not prepared for this. The same even, careful tone she might use herself upon waking in a strange situation, stripped of performance, methodical with something that might have been the early tremor of unease, kept under strict governance. He sat up. She watched him do it with a peripheral awareness she would have difficulty justifying. The way he moved was different from how she remembered him moving at school. Less theatrical, the gestures smaller and more considered. He ran one hand through his hair without looking at her, surveyed the room with grey eyes that were sharper now, cataloguing it the same way she had. "Hotel," he said. "Yes." "Wizarding Quarter. The Orin, if I had to guess. They use that brass for everything." He looked at the fireplace, the furniture, the curtains. "Single room." "Single bed," she said, because it seemed important to establish. His gaze moved to it, to the clear evidence of two people having slept in it. The indentations, the displaced pillows, the duvet that had been pulled toward her side in the night. "So, it appears," he said. He stood, and the distance that placed between them felt both necessary and somehow wrong in a way she didn't examine. He moved to the table, picked up the bottle by its neck, turned the label toward him. "Odessa Reserve," he said. "Elemental spirits. Wizarding distillate. They add memory moss to the aging barrels." He set it back down. "That explains it. Memory moss." She knew the term. A naturally occurring magical fungus that grew in certain Scottish peat deposits, absorbed into spirits during long aging, known to produce retrograde amnesia in sufficient quantity. Not dangerous, not permanent. The memories were there, merely submerged. "How much did we drink?" He looked at the glasses, then at the bottle, which was considerably less full than it ought to be at the start of an evening. "Enough," he said. She stood too, because remaining in the bed while he stood felt like a tactical disadvantage she wasn't willing to accept. She reached for her clutch, removed her wand, felt the immediate and irrational comfort of its familiar weight. She crossed to the writing desk and unfolded the lavender paper she'd seen from across the room. It was a receipt. Room 14, single occupancy, checked in at 11:47 in the evening, prepaid with a wizarding credit account. She turned it over. In the margin, in handwriting that was not hers, neat, slanted, controlled, were 4 words. "You shouldn't walk alone." She read them twice. Then she put the receipt down on the desk and did not immediately turn around. "Did you write this?" she asked. She heard him cross the room. He stopped at her shoulder, close enough that she registered the warmth of him before she registered the specific scent. Cedar, stone, the thinned remnant of last night's cologne, and beneath it something simpler and warmer, the scent of sleep and skin and morning. She kept her eyes on the paper. He read it. She watched his reflection in the dark glass of the window, the slight contraction around his eyes. "That's my handwriting," he said. "I know it is. I've seen enough of your annotations in the 8th year study materials." She paused. "What does it mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "that at some point last night, I apparently felt responsible for your safety." He stepped back, and the warmth of his proximity withdrew like the tide. "Which suggests I was considerably less in possession of my faculties than I'd like to have been." She turned then, because the careful flatness of that last sentence contained something she couldn't quite identify. Not cruelty, not deflection, but something more like a man firmly closing a door he has not yet looked behind. "We need to figure out what happened," she said. "Obviously. Not because—" She stopped, recalibrated. "We both have lives, reputations, work. If we were seen, I'm aware of how reputations function, Granger." The old name, her schoolgirl name, not hostile exactly, but carrying the particular weight of long habit, of years of their particular dynamic encoded in a single syllable. "You don't need to explain the consequences to me." She studied him. He was standing near the window now, the pale, pressing light finding the angles of his face with impartial precision. The open collar of his shirt, the rolled sleeve, the silver face of his watch, which had somehow remained on his wrist through whatever the previous evening had been. He looked, she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, like someone who had spent a great deal of effort constructing a version of himself that could withstand being looked at. And who was, this morning, without the materials to complete that construction? She understood the feeling. "The gala," she said. "We start there." What do you remember? He turned from the window. For a moment, he simply looked at her across the room, the length of it between them like a negotiated boundary. And she saw something move behind his eyes that was not quite calculation and not quite openness, but something suspended between the two. "I remember you," he said finally, arguing with someone near the drinks table. She blinked. "I remember that too," she said carefully. "Robards." He was dismissing the creature rights amendment again. "I may have been—" "You were spectacular," he said, and then his expression shifted slightly, as though the word had escaped before he'd approved its release. He looked away. "Spectacularly unreasonable, as ever." She let it pass, because she had heard what came before the correction. "And then," she prompted. He moved toward the chair nearest the cold fireplace and sat, crossing one ankle over his knee, with the deliberate ease of a man reminding himself how to be comfortable. She took the other chair without being invited. The bottle of Odessa Reserve sat between them on the low table like an accusation. "And then," he said, "I believe someone handed me a glass of this." She reached for the bottle, turned it in her hands. On the back label, in small print beneath the distillery information, a line she hadn't noticed before. Note: memory return typically occurs within 24 hours of last consumption, may be accelerated by familiar stimuli. She set the bottle down. Familiar stimuli. She looked at Draco Malfoy sitting across from her in the morning light, dishevelled and unguarded and entirely real, and felt the second tremor move through her, slower this time, and deeper, and significantly more difficult to name. "We're going to remember everything," she said. "Yes," he agreed. He was looking at the fireplace. "We are." Neither of them said what they were both, she suspected, thinking, that this might be the more complicated part. Outside, through the gap in the curtains, London was waking up. Pigeons on the window ledge, the muted sound of morning traffic from the Muggle street below. The thin gold line of light had widened while they weren't looking, and it lay now across the carpet between their chairs, like something drawn deliberately, dividing the room into two equal halves. She straightened the already straight hem of her dress. He turned the silver watch on his wrist, once, twice, without looking at it. And somewhere beneath the smooth surface of the previous night's memory, something began, very slowly, to stir. The room had a minibar. Hermione discovered this while searching the wardrobe for something, anything, that might constitute evidence, and found instead a narrow cabinet fitted into the lower half of the wardrobe's interior, stocked with small bottles of water, a wrapped packet of biscuits, and 2 glass vials of what she recognized as sober-up solution in the hotel's signature lavender packaging. She stared at the vials for a moment. "There's sober up," she called over her shoulder. "That won't help." His voice came from the direction of the desk. She heard the sound of paper, the receipt being turned over, examined again. Sober up addresses alcohol. Memory moss is a separate mechanism. You'd need an recollection draft, and I somehow doubt the orange stocks those alongside the biscuits. She took a vial of water and closed the cabinet. "You know a great deal about memory moss for someone who claims not to remember drinking it." A pause, weighted and precise. "I know a great deal about most things I've encountered at the bottom of a bottle," he said. That isn't the same as having planned for it. She turned. He was at the desk, his back to her, the receipt in one hand and something else in the other. A small folded card, cream-coloured, the kind left by hotel staff. He hadn't mentioned it. "What's that?" He held it out without turning. She crossed the room and took it from his fingers, careful not to touch them, which required a small, precise adjustment of her grip. The card read, in the hotel's printed script, "Thank you for celebrating with us. Compliments of the house. Your suite has been extended until noon. We hope you enjoyed the Oran's private event last evening." Private event. She turned the card over. Nothing on the back. She looked at the desk surface. He'd been methodical, she realized. Had arranged what he'd found in a loose left-to-right sequence. The receipt, an unused matchbook with the Oran's gold crest, a crumpled cocktail napkin with something written on it in what appeared to be two different hands. She reached for the napkin before he could redirect her attention. Two columns of handwriting. His. The same slanted, controlled script from the receipt margin, on the left side. On the right, her own. She recognized it with a lurch of something between amusement and alarm. Her handwriting when she was writing quickly, the letters tilted and compressed, the way she wrote when she was arguing a point, and her hand could barely keep pace with the thought. His column read, "Precedent. Wizengamot, 1987, case of Thicknesser versus Crown, establishes that magical compulsion cannot be retroactively prosecuted if..." Her column interrupted his, cutting diagonally across the napkin's fold. That only applies if the compulsion was externally sourced. Self-administered magic operates under a completely different statutory framework, which you would know if you'd read past the summary. His writing resumed beneath hers, smaller now, the letters pressed together. "I read the full case. You're misreading the intent of the secondary clause." And then, at the very bottom, in letters that were larger and less careful than everything above, as though written later or faster, or with less attention available, in his hand, "You're the most infuriating person I have ever argued with." And beneath that, unmistakably hers, with what she could only describe as the written equivalent of a reluctant smile pressed into it. Likewise. Hermione set the napkin down on the desk very gently, as though it were a thing that might startle. "We were arguing about magical law," she said. "So it appears." He had moved to the window. She could see his reflection again in the dark glass. Arms crossed, gaze directed downward toward the street. "That narrows the timeline considerably. I don't make a habit of debating statutory frameworks with people I've only just encountered at a drinks table." Meaning we'd been talking for a while. Meaning we'd been talking long enough for me to know which case you were misreading. I wasn't misreading it. "Granger." He said it without heat, almost tiredly, and something about that particular exhaustion, not irritation, not contempt, but the specific weariness of someone who has had this argument before and found it, despite everything, not entirely unpleasant, snagged at her attention. She looked at the napkin again, at the likewise at the bottom, at the handwriting that was undeniably hers, and the fact that she had written it without apparent reluctance, without the hedging qualifications she habitually used in writing, without any of the careful distance she maintained around him. Just likewise, as though they had been people who said such things to one another. as though it had felt natural. "The private event," she said, pulling herself back. "The hotel card mentioned it. The gala wasn't here. We were at the ministry, which means at some point we left the ministry and came here. Together," he said. "Apparently together." "Why?" It was not a question with an obvious answer. She picked up her clutch from where she'd left it on the desk, opened it, removed its contents with the methodical efficiency she used when she needed her hands busy. Wand. Lip colour, barely used, which suggested the evening had been longer than the lip colour could withstand. Her ministry identification card. 3 folded receipts from previous weeks she'd never cleared out. A folded program. She stopped. She unfolded it. It was the gala program, the ministry's official one, white and gold, the kind distributed at the entrance. She'd received one and immediately tucked it away because she already knew the schedule. But inside this one, tucked between the pages, was a second program, smaller, printed on the orange lavender paper, the same shade as the room receipt. The Orin Hotel presents an evening of magical antiquities and rare spirits, private viewing and tasting, by invitation only, 10 p.m. to midnight. 2 tickets were paper-clipped to the inside, both used, the corners folded over in the way ticket takers folded them. She placed it on the desk beside the napkin, the receipt, the matchbook, the growing constellation of evidence. "Someone gave us tickets," she said. He had come away from the window. He stood beside her at the desk now, close enough that she could feel the subtle shift in the air's temperature, and looked at the program without touching it. "Who brought you to the gala?" he asked. "I came with Ginny Weasley. She disappeared early." She paused. "You? Alone?" He said it without inflection, but she heard the small, deliberate weight of that word and chose not to press it. "I don't generally attend these things with company. Someone still arranged for both of us to be here." She tapped the tickets. 2 tickets, clipped together. Either someone put them in my bag as a pair or one of us acquired them and brought the other. He picked up the program, turned it over. On the back, in pencil, faint, nearly worn away, as though written quickly and in poor light, a single line, Table 4. "You'll like the 1987 Odessa." She leaned slightly closer to read it. So did he. And for a moment they were both bent over the same small square of lavender paper, close enough that the loose wave of her hair nearly brushed his shoulder, and she became acutely aware of the particular silence between them. Not empty, but dense, textured, freighted with the proximity of 2 people who were accustomed to maintaining distance and had, briefly, forgotten to. She straightened first. "That's not your handwriting," she said. "Or mine." "No." He set the program down. "Someone arranged this deliberately. Both of us at Table 4, the Odessa Reserve." "The memory moss," she said slowly. His eyes came to her then, fully, for the first time since he'd opened them that morning. Grey and direct, and carrying something she couldn't categorize. It lived in the middle distance between suspicion and something much less comfortable. "You think someone intended for us to lose our memories," he said. "I think someone intended for us to spend an evening together without the benefit of our usual defenses." She held his gaze, though it required a small private effort. The memory loss may have been incidental, or it may have been the point. Either way, his jaw was very still. Someone thought it would be instructive. Yes. Someone with access to the Ministry Gala's guest list, connections at the Orin, and enough knowledge of both our habits to know we'd argue ourselves into a corner and stay there. A pause. The muscle in his jaw moved once, briefly. Who in your life would do that? She thought of Ginny, who had disappeared within 20 minutes. She thought of the look on Ginny's face in the weeks prior, that particular studied casualness that meant she was thinking something she had decided not to say. She thought of Harry, who had mentioned Draco's name twice in the last month. In the specific, careful way, he mentioned things he thought she was too stubborn to consider on her own. She said none of this. "I have a theory," she said instead. "I imagine you have several. One working theory. I'd prefer to confirm it before I name the culprit and ruin a friendship." Something crossed his face. Something that might, in another man, in different light, have been the ghost of amusement. It was there for less than a second, and then it was not. "Protecting someone," he said. "Gathering evidence first. There's a difference." Is there? Not a question this time either, but a different kind. Quieter, as though it referred to something larger than the sentence it occupied. She looked at him, at the open collar of his shirt, and the careful arrangement of his stillness, and the fact that he was standing in a strange hotel room on a Tuesday morning with no memory of the previous evening. And his first instinct had been to catalogue, to sequence, to build an account of events from physical evidence. The same instinct she'd had, she realized, the same methodology, the same need to construct order from the inexplicable. She wondered when he had learned to do that. She wondered what he'd had to survive to make it instinct. "We should get breakfast," she said, because the thought had become too large for the room's dimensions, and she needed to put something ordinary in its place. "Somewhere we can think. The memories will surface faster with familiar stimuli. The hotel card said so, and that means being awake and present and... Granger." Her name again, same flat delivery, but something underneath it had changed register slightly. She stopped. "You have a piece of your hair." He made a brief, imprecise gesture in the vicinity of his own jaw. "Caught." She reached up. The strand was wound lightly around the small silver earring she'd worn to the gala. She could feel it now. She tried to work it free, but the angle was wrong, and she couldn't see it. And the earring's clasp was small, and her fingers were clumsy with the particular gracelessness of being watched. "Here." He said it quietly, and before she had processed the word, he had stepped forward and his fingers were at her jaw, gentle with a precision that had nothing to do with tenderness and everything to do with control. A man handling something he didn't want to damage. She went entirely still. His touch lasted perhaps 4 seconds. The strand came free. He stepped back immediately, and the space between them reconstituted itself as though it had never been bridged. She did not look at him directly. "Thank you," she said. "The clasp is good," he said, meaning the earring. "Don't lose it." She had absolutely no idea what to say to that, so she said nothing and reached instead for her wand from the desk and cast a quick cleansing charm over herself, feeling her dress settle back into something approximating presentability. Her hair smoothed itself into a state of temporary cooperation. He watched her do it with his arms at his sides. Then he reached for his own jacket. She hadn't noticed it, draped over the back of the desk chair, shrugged it on, buttoned 2 of the middle buttons with the ease of long habit, and became, in the space of 30 seconds, something far more assembled than the man who had opened his eyes on the other side of that bed 40 minutes ago. The transformation was, she thought, quite impressive and quite deliberate. And, if she was honest, the thing she found most recognizable about him, this capacity to become composed on command, to reassemble the architecture of himself over whatever the morning had temporarily exposed. She could respect that. She practiced her own version of it daily. "Breakfast," he said, and it was not agreement or concession, but simply confirmation, the word placed neatly into the space she'd opened. He moved to the door, and she gathered her clutch and the folded program, tucking both inside, and followed. At the threshold, he paused, hand on the doorframe, and looked back at the room. At the bed, the 2 glasses, the bottle of Odessa Reserve with its damning label. "We'll remember by tonight," he said. Not to her exactly, more to the room, more to himself. "Yes," she said. He nodded once and stepped into the corridor, and she followed him into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the Arin Hotel, with the lavender program pressed against her palm inside her clutch, and the ghost of 4 seconds at her jaw, and the overwhelming, inconvenient certainty that whatever they were going to remember, it was going to change something. She was not yet sure what frightened her more, the possibility that it would, or the possibility that it wouldn't. The Oran's breakfast room was nearly empty at this hour, a Tuesday morning, early enough that the weekend's guests had long since departed, and the weekday ones had not yet arrived in any significant number. 2 elderly witches at a corner table, speaking in low voices over tea. A businessman with the Daily Prophet folded to the financial section, not reading it. A waiter who moved between tables with the particular unhurried grace of someone who understood that morning was its own kind of ceremony and ought not to be rushed. Hermione and Draco were shown to a table near the window without being asked whether they preferred it. The waiter, young, professional, with the careful neutrality of someone trained not to register surprise, placed 2 menus before them and said, with a slight incline of his head, "Welcome back." The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Welcome back. She felt the ripple of it move through her. Across the table, she watched Draco receive the same information. The barely perceptible pause in the motion of reaching for his menu. The fraction of a second in which his hand simply stopped, suspended, before continuing its trajectory as though nothing had interrupted it. "Thank you," she said to the waiter, because someone had to, and Draco was occupied with studying the menu with the focused intensity of a man who had found something urgently fascinating about the egg options. The waiter left. The Daily Prophet businessman turned a page. "We were here last night," she said quietly, "for breakfast, or something. He recognized us. I gathered that. We should ask him." "Not yet." He turned a page of the menu that he hadn't read. "Let him come back naturally. If you ask him now, he'll give you a rehearsed answer. Wait until he's comfortable, then ask something specific. You'll get more." She looked at him over the top of her menu. "That's surprisingly tactical. I work in acquisition negotiations. A beat. People perform differently under direct questioning than they do when they think they're simply being helpful. You use that. She filed this away, not the tactic itself, which she'd employed in her own work often enough, but the texture of the information. Acquisition negotiations. She knew, in the vague way one knew things about people who moved in overlapping social circles without ever truly intersecting, that Draco had taken over a portion of the Malfoy estate's portfolio after the war, had redirected it towards something quieter than his family's previous enterprises. The details had never concerned her enough to seek them out. She found, sitting across from him in the morning light with a menu she wasn't reading, that they concerned her now. "I'm a researcher," she said, and immediately felt the inadequacy of that, as though she needed to offer something in exchange, as though they were negotiating their own kind of acquisition. Department of Magical Law, primarily focused on creature rights legislation, though I've been pulled into the Obliviation Ethics Review this quarter. He looked up from the menu. The grey of his eyes in the window light was not cold, she noticed. It was complicated. The way water was complicated. The way anything was complicated once you stopped assuming you already understood its depth. Obliviation ethics, he said. The Ministry has been reviewing historic cases where obliviation was used as a legal remedy rather than a last resort. There are cases that should not have been sanctioned. She kept her voice even. I'm writing the framework for recourse. Something moved across his face, swift and illegible, there and gone before she could isolate it. That must be interesting work, he said, in a tone that meant he understood it was something more than interesting, and that he wasn't yet certain how close he wanted to stand to that particular fire. She understood that too. It is, she said simply, and returned to the menu, and they sat in the particular silence of two people who have just exchanged, without intending to, something real. The waiter returned. They ordered, she, toast and tea and fruit. He, black coffee and eggs, with the decisive brevity of a man who had decided before he sat down. When the waiter moved to leave, she touched her napkin lightly, anchoring the gesture to something ordinary. "Forgive me," she said, with the pleasant precision she used in ministry meetings when she wanted something and intended to have it. "My colleague and I had rather a long evening. You mentioned welcome back. Were we here last night?" The waiter's professional neutrality softened fractionally into something that might have been warmth. "Yes, ma'am, for the antiquities evening. You were at table 4, the small Odessa tasting." He hesitated. "You were here quite late. Lovely to see you both again." Both. Again. The words settled into the accumulating evidence like the final tile of a pattern clicking into place. "Thank you," Draco said. His voice was entirely pleasant, almost warm, carrying none of the morning's careful restraint. She recognized it as performance and found it, paradoxically, more interesting than the restraint, because it meant he was paying attention, that he understood the value of what the waiter might tell them and was willing to deploy charm in its service. The Odessa was exceptional. We may have overindulged slightly. The waiter laughed, a small, genuine sound. The 1987 is particularly smooth, easy to lose track. He leaned in slightly, conspiratorially, the way people did when they had a piece of a story they'd been quietly holding and were pleased to be asked. You were the last to leave the tasting room. The sommelier had to gently suggest it was time. A smile. You were in the middle of a rather spirited debate. About? Hermione asked. I couldn't say exactly. Something about intent, I think. Whether intent changes the nature of a thing. He shrugged pleasantly. The sommelier said you were both very passionate about it. Whether intent changes the nature of a thing. She did not look at Draco. She felt him not looking at her with the same deliberate care. Thank you, she said to the waiter. You've been very helpful. He left with a small bow, and she and Draco sat with the information arranged between them on the invisible surface of the table alongside the salt cellar and the small vase of fresh lavender and the growing weight of a morning that kept expanding beyond its original dimensions. Intent, he said after a moment. We were apparently discussing philosophy by the end of the evening. We were apparently discussing it the entire evening. He turned his coffee cup on its saucer, once, a single rotation. The napkin was about legal intent. This was something broader. It's the same question, she said, and then heard herself saying it, and recognized it as the kind of sentence that emerged when a thought had been developing below the surface of the morning's activity without her conscious permission. Whether something done for the wrong reasons can still produce the right result, whether the motivation contaminates the outcome. He was very still. Or whether the outcome retroactively dignifies the motivation, he said quietly. The words arrived with a weight that had nothing to do with philosophical abstraction, and they both knew it, and the knowing sat between them in the morning air like a third presence at the table, unintroduced, uninvited, and absolutely real. She busied herself with the arrival of her tea, wrapping both hands around the cup, letting the warmth ground her. The memories, she said, redirecting. Are you getting anything? Fragments? He considered this with the same focused inwardness she recognized from the receipt examination. The tasting room. Low light, not candlelight, something more amber. Small tables. I have a sense of the room being... He paused, selecting the word with visible care. Intimate, not crowded. I have that too. She had it, in fact, with a vividness that surprised her. The amber light and the smell of aged spirits and the specific acoustics of a small room with high ceilings and few people. The way sound had a different quality there, closer and rounder. And voices. Not the words yet, but the tone of them, he said. Yes. He looked at her. She looked at him. The recognition of sharing the same fragmentary experience, the same amber room returning in the same pieces, the same edges of sound without content, was unexpectedly disorienting. As though their memories had been stored in the same place and were returning along the same route. Familiar stimuli, the bottle had said. She understood now with uncomfortable clarity that they were familiar stimuli for each other. That sitting across this table in the morning light, in proximity, in conversation, was exactly the condition under which the previous evening would most efficiently return. She was not certain whether to find this useful or alarming. She settled, pragmatically, on both. Her toast arrived. She ate it with the methodical attention she gave to tasks that required her hands busy and her mind free. Across from her, Draco ate his eggs without the self-consciousness of a man being watched, which was itself notable. Most people she had observed ate differently when they knew they were being observed. He did not. Whether this meant he was accustomed to scrutiny or simply indifferent to her specifically, she couldn't yet determine. There was a moment, he said suddenly, without preamble, still looking at his plate. Earlier in the evening, before the hotel, at the gala, something happened that I have it more clearly than the rest. He set his fork down with precision. You were on the steps, the main staircase, coming down from the upper atrium. There's a landing there, halfway down, where the portraits are. You'd stopped to look at something, and everyone else had passed you, and you were... He stopped. She waited. Alone, he said. You were alone, and you weren't aware of it. You were looking at one of the portraits, and you were... I don't have the word for it. Not sad. Something more like... contained, she said softly. His eyes came up. The way you feel in the middle of a crowd when you realize you've been performing for hours, she said. And the performance has become more exhausting than the thing underneath it. And for a moment, when no one's looking, you just... She stopped herself. The specificity of what she'd said alarmed her slightly. She reached for her tea. I was looking at the portrait of Dumbledore. A silence, singular and weighted. Yes, he said. You were. The Daily Prophet businessman folded his paper and left. The two elderly witches called for more tea. Outside the window, London moved past in its unhurried morning way, pigeons and black cabs, and a woman walking a very small dog with immense dignity. I came to stand beside you, Draco said. He was looking at the window now. On the landing. Her hands steadied around the cup. I remember that, she said, and found, to her own private astonishment, that she did. The peripheral awareness of someone arriving beside her, not speaking immediately, simply being present in the specific way that distinguished intention from accident. The sense that the presence had been chosen. You didn't say anything. No. You looked at the portrait. Yes. She had not turned to see who it was. She remembered that too. She had known somehow from the quality of the silence. She had not turned because turning would have ended it, and she had not wanted it to end. The anonymous, inexplicable comfort of someone choosing to stand beside you without demanding anything of the moment. She had not known, standing on that landing, that it was him. Or perhaps, the thought arrived carefully, like a guest she hadn't invited but couldn't turn away. Perhaps she had. And then, she asked. He turned from the window. The morning light was fully present now, unhesitant, rendering everything in clean and unambiguous terms. And then, you said something to Dumbledore's portrait, he said. I don't remember what. And you turned, and you saw me, and you didn't leave. The simplicity of it struck her somewhere undefended. You didn't leave. As though that had been the significant thing. As though her remaining had been a choice worth noting. She set her cup down. It made the smallest sound against the saucer. No, she agreed. I didn't. He looked at her with the grey eyes that were not cold, and the careful stillness that was not indifference, and the open collar of the shirt he'd worn through an entire night they couldn't yet fully remember. And she felt the third tremor of the morning move through her. Nothing like the first two. Not panic, not fascination, but something slower and warmer and considerably more dangerous in its patience. Her clutch was on the table. Inside it, the lavender program with its 2 used tickets clipped together. Someone had planned this. Someone had decided, with more confidence than either of them had apparently possessed on their own, that they ought to spend an evening in the same room, with their defenses dissolved, talking about intent and the nature of things. She was beginning to think that someone had been right. She was not ready to say so, but she was beginning to think it. The memory came back in the lift. They had settled the breakfast bill, a brief, wordless negotiation that ended with Draco placing his hand over the receipt before she could reach it, not looking at her, his expression carrying the particular finality of a man who had made a decision and had no interest in debating it. She had let it go, which surprised her because she was not generally a person who let things go. But there had been something in the gesture that was not performance and not generosity exactly. Something quieter than both, like the instinct to cover a door against a draft. Functional, unremarkable, his. She had let it go. They rode the lift back to the 4th floor in silence, standing at a distance that was slightly too deliberate to be natural, close enough that the small mirrored space imposed proximity, far enough that neither could be accused of seeking it. She watched their reflections in the polished brass doors. Herself, dress still presentable from the cleansing charm, hair cooperating on a temporary basis, clutch held in both hands before her like a small shield. Him, jacket buttoned, posture assembled, looking at the floor indicator with the focused attention of a man for whom floor numbers had become briefly very interesting. The lift rose. The brass doors reflected them back at themselves without mercy. And somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd floor, without any apparent trigger, no sound, no scent, no deliberate act of memory, the amber room returned, not in fragments this time, in full. She felt it arrive the way you felt weather change before the rain came. A shift in atmospheric pressure, a sudden density in the air, the sense of the present moment becoming momentarily transparent, the past visible through it. The tasting room at the Arin, 10 o'clock or close to it. 6 tables arranged around a central display case containing bottles that were older than most of the ministry's current legislation. Amber light from wall sconces with flame-shaped bulbs that cast no shadows, only warmth. The sommelier, a small witch with silver-streaked hair, and the quiet authority of someone who understood that she was the least important person in the room, and that this was precisely where her power resided, moving between tables with a bottle wrapped in dark cloth. Table 4 was in the corner. She had found it already when she arrived, because she had apparently arrived first. She remembered that now with absolute clarity. The slight embarrassment of being first, of having come directly from the gala without pausing, of sitting down at a corner table in a hotel tasting room alone and wondering for approximately 90 seconds whether she had made a very significant error in judgment. And then the door had opened. The lift reached the 4th floor. The brass doors parted. She stepped out into the carpeted corridor and stood there, and Draco stepped out beside her, and for a moment neither of them moved toward the room. "You remember something," he said. It was not a question. He had, she suspected, been watching her reflection the same way she'd been watching his. "The tasting room," she said, coming in, finding the table. A pause. Waiting. The word landed with more weight than she'd intended. She saw him register it, the slight adjustment in his expression, something between acknowledgement and something she couldn't yet name. "I was late," he said. 7 minutes. "You counted." "I count things when I'm nervous." She said it before she'd approved the admission, and then it was said, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she didn't want to retract it. It was true. It had always been true. Counting was the mind's way of imposing grid lines on shapeless anxiety, of making the unmeasurable at least sequential. It's a habit. He was quiet for a moment. The corridor stretched away behind them, empty, cream-coloured, the carpet runner absorbing the echo of nothing. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You used to count the books on the shelves in the library," he said, without particular emphasis, as though he were reporting a fact he had no special investment in. "When you were working something out, your lips moved. You thought no one noticed." The precision of the observation struck her somewhere between the ribs. Not painfully, just precisely. The way a key found the right lock, not by force, but by fit. "You noticed," she said. "I was 17 and had nothing better to do than be unpleasant to people." A beat, dry and self-aware. "I observed a great deal." She studied him in the corridor light. This man who had been a boy she'd catalogued as enemy, and found it, decade by decade, increasingly insufficient as a category. The door to room 14 was 6 feet away. The key? A real key. Heavy brass, old-fashioned, the Orin apparently having opinions about the charm of manual locks, was in her clutch. They hadn't moved toward the door. "We should go back in," she said. "We should." Neither of them moved. "The memories are coming back," she said. "Yes. Faster now. Familiar stimuli." He said it the same way she'd thought it, as though the phrase had arrived in both their minds via the same route. His gaze was level, carrying that quality she kept returning to, the complexity of grey water, depth without declaration. Being near you is, apparently, the relevant condition. Being near you. The phrase was clinical, carefully chosen, stripped of all decorative implication. She understood that the stripping was deliberate. She understood, more uncomfortably, that she could hear what lived underneath it anyway. She moved to the door, opened it, went inside. He followed, and the room received them both again. The made bed, she noticed, the duvet smoothed, and the pillows straightened, housekeeping having passed in their absence. The evidence on the desk remained undisturbed. The Odessa bottle catching what was now full morning light and holding it in its dark glass like something preserved. She sat in her chair by the cold fireplace. He took his. "Tell me what you remember," she said, "and I'll tell you what I have. We'll build it together." He was quiet for a moment. Something she had begun to understand was not reticence, but process. The same internal sequencing she employed before speaking on complex matters, the brief requirement to arrange the material before presenting it. "You were already there," he said. "Table 4. You'd taken the chair facing the door. I remember noticing that. Always facing the door, always knowing the exit." He paused. "I sat across from you. You had the program open and you were reading it, and you didn't look up immediately." "I knew it was you," she said. "I recognized the sound of you sitting down." She frowned slightly at her own sentence, at the intimacy embedded in it. The idea of recognizing someone by the specific sound they made occupying space. That sounds accurate, he said quietly. She looked at the fireplace, the cold grate, the ash of someone else's fire from the night before. The sommelier brought the Odessa, she said, the 1987, and she poured the first measure and explained the aging process, the memory moss, the peat conditions. I remember thinking it was beautiful, the color of it in the glass. Amber, he said. Like the light. Like the light. She felt it again as she said it, the specific quality of that moment, the glass in her hand, and the amber room, and the fact of him sitting across from her, familiar and strange in equal measure, and the evening opening before them like a space neither had expected to find. You said something. When she left, the first thing you actually said to me. He was still. I said, he said slowly, the memory clearly returning as he spoke it, that I didn't know whether to be annoyed or impressed that someone had arranged this without consulting either of us. She felt the smile before it reached her face. She didn't try to stop it. And I said, you said that you were exclusively annoyed and that I should keep up. The ghost of something warm moved across his expression, there and controlled, and not quite extinguished. And then you drank the Odessa and said it was remarkable, and that you took back 30% of your annoyance. Only 30. You were very specific about the percentage. I was being accurate. You were being... He stopped, and she watched him not say whatever word had arrived first, watched him select a replacement with the care of a man who understood that some words, once placed, could not be retrieved. You were being yourself, he said, which was... The pause was longer this time. Which was what? She asked. Her voice was even. Her hands were still in her lap. He looked at the fireplace. Easier than I expected, he said. It was easier than I had, in any version of this evening I might have imagined, expected. The honesty of it arrived without flourish, without protective irony, and it was this, she thought, this specific quality of admission given without armor, that moved something in her chest she had been keeping very carefully weighted down since she had woken to find him asleep 6 inches away. For me too, she said. The room held the words. Outside, a cloud moved across the morning sun, and the light in the room shifted. Not dimmer exactly, but different. The quality of it changing from sharp to diffuse, from the light that showed edges to the light that dissolved them. We talked for 2 hours, she said. Before the rest of the Odessa. I have it coming back now. Not everything, but the Wizengamot case, he said. The napkin. Before that, you asked me about the Obliviation review. She watched him carefully. You asked what had brought me to it, specifically. A stillness. And you told me, he said. It was not quite a question. I told you about the Catamol case, the family that was obliviated in 97 and never recovered their memories fully, whose youngest son grew up not knowing who he was. She kept her voice level. I told you that I had found 3 similar cases in the 98 records alone, and that the ministry had classified them as administrative necessities, and that I had been angry about it for 7 years, and had finally reached a position where I could do something about the anger. He was very still. The kind of stillness that was not the absence of feeling, but its extreme compression. I told you something too, he said, quietly. Yes. I don't. He stopped. His hand, resting on the arm of the chair, adjusted its position slightly, the fingers straightening and then loosening. I don't have that part yet. She looked at him, at the hand on the chair arm, at the precise, deliberate quality of his stillness, the way it was costing him something she couldn't fully price. I know you did, she said carefully. I don't have the content yet either. Only... She paused, reaching for the fragment, turning it in her mind's grip. Only the feeling of it, the feeling of receiving something from you that you hadn't intended to give so readily, and the way it... She stopped. Changed the pressure in the room, he said. Yes, she said quietly. Exactly that. They sat with the recovered pieces of the evening arranged between them. The amber room, the first easy hostility, the gradual dissolution of rehearsed positions, the napkin argument, the something he had said that neither of them yet fully possessed. The city moved outside the window. The cloud cleared. The light returned to its previous sharpness, finding edges again. The brass of the bottle, the silver of his watch, the small, careful distance between two chairs that had become, at some point in the last 3 hours, considerably less vast than it had been. I want to remember what you said, she told him. He looked at her, the grey eyes complicated as water over stone. So do I, he said. And she understood with the particular certainty of a person who dealt in precision that he did not mean he wanted to remember his own words. He meant he wanted to remember the moment she had heard them. Her breath moved through her slowly, like something learning a new pace. Outside room 14 in the corridor, the hollow sound of a housekeeping trolley moved past and faded, and the room settled back into its particular silence. The two chairs, the cold fireplace, the desk with its constellation of evidence, and the long, patient morning still waiting to give them the rest of what they'd lost. It came back to him first. She knew it because of his hands. She had been at the desk, reorganizing the evidence, the receipt, the program, the napkin, the hotel card, arranging them in chronological sequence the way she arranged case files, trying to impose structure on the shapeless middle section of the previous evening that still resisted recovery. She had her back to him. She heard the quality of his silence change. There was silence that was simply the absence of sound, and there was silence that was occupied, full of something being processed, held, turned over in careful hands. The silence behind her became the second kind, so gradually that she almost missed the transition. Almost. She turned. He was sitting exactly as she'd left him, in the chair by the cold fireplace, forearms resting on his knees, hands loosely linked. But his eyes were not on the fireplace, or the window, or any of the neutral middle distances he'd been using all morning to avoid looking at her directly. They were on the floor, focused inward, and his face had done something she hadn't seen it do yet. It had opened slightly, not dramatically, not in any way that would be visible to someone who hadn't been cataloguing his expressions for the last 3 hours with the involuntary attention she'd apparently been giving them. Just a fractional releasing of the architecture, the way a room looked when someone had moved through it recently, the faint evidence of habitation, of something having been present. You remember, she said. He didn't answer immediately. His thumbs moved against each other once, a slow, deliberate pressure, and then stilled. "I told you," he said, "about my father." The room contracted slightly around the sentence. She crossed to her chair and sat, because standing felt wrong for whatever this was. She didn't speak. She had learned in the years of working with people who carried difficult material that the worst thing you could do in the moment before a confidence was to fill the space it needed to enter. "Not," he stopped, began again. "Not what you know, not the trial, not the testimony, not the version that was in the prophet for a week and then became simply a fact that everyone carried about me." He was still looking at the floor, but the angle of his jaw had changed slightly, tilted upward, fractionally, the way a person adjusted when they were about to carry something heavier than usual. "I told you what I had not, what I have not told anyone." She waited. "I told you that I visit him." The words arrived with the precise flatness of a man delivering a sentence he has rehearsed for no one, because it has never been said aloud before. "Azkaban, every month. I have done since the end of his sentence extension, when visiting was permitted again. I go alone. I don't tell anyone." The cold fireplace, the morning light, the specific weight of what he'd just placed in the room. "Why?" she asked, softly, not challenging, the genuine question, the one that mattered. His hands shifted slightly, the loose link of his fingers tightening for a moment. "Because he's still there," he said. "Not in Azkaban. He was released 18 months ago. He's at the manor. He's—" A pause. Something moving through his profile that she could not name but recognized in its shape. The outline of grief that had made its accommodation with daily life and no longer wept, but sometimes, unexpectedly, pressed. "He is not the man who made the decisions I spent my childhood interpreting as certainty. He is an old man in a large house who made catastrophic choices and is living in what remains of them." She was very still. "And I go," he said, "because leaving would be... because I am not able to..." He stopped fully, his jaw set. She watched him refuse with visible effort the easier version of the sentence, the one that named his guilt as simple filial duty, that reduced the monthly visits to obligation, that kept the thing at arm's length. "Because you love him," she said, quietly, without judgment or elaboration. The line of his shoulders changed. "Despite everything," he said. "Yes." She understood, not theoretically, but in the way that understanding sometimes arrived, whole and immediate, and recognizing its own reflection. She thought of her own parents, of the 18 months she had spent after the war dismantling the charm she'd placed on their minds, not because she doubted whether they'd forgive her, but because she didn't know if she'd forgiven herself. Of standing in their kitchen in Adelaide, watching her mother make tea, and knowing that this woman had, for nearly 2 years, not known she had a daughter, and that this had been Hermione's choice, made for love, and that love did not make the cost of it disappear. "I understand that," she said. He looked at her then, fully, directly, without the deflective angles he'd been using all morning. The grey eyes unguarded in a way she suspected he was not entirely aware of, carrying the particular exposure of someone who has said a true thing and is now waiting for the quality of the silence that follows it. She held his gaze and did not look away, and did not offer him the comfortable deflection of practical sympathy. "I know you do," he said. And then, after a moment, "That's what I said to you last night. In the tasting room, I said, "I know that you understand what it costs to love people who made choices you couldn't follow." The sentence arrived in her memory then, complete and exact, slotting into place with the physical sensation of a key turning. She heard it in the amber room, in his voice stripped of its daytime caution by the Odessa and the low light and 2 hours of conversation that had gradually dismantled their respective careful performances. She heard the way she had received it, the silence she had kept after, the way she had reached across the small table and put her hand briefly, barely over his, not holding, just the surface of her fingers against the back of his hand, 3 seconds, withdrawn before either of them could decide what to do with it. The memory arrived, and she felt it in her palm as though it was still happening. She looked down at her hand on the chair arm. "I did that," she said. "Didn't I?" Not a question. "Yes," he said. "And you?" "I didn't move," he said. "I didn't pull back." The precision of that, didn't pull back. Not that he had welcomed it, not that he had responded, but that he had remained still, had allowed the contact without withdrawing, which she understood in the specific grammar of how he moved through the world, was its own significant thing. She felt the warmth of the recovered memory and the morning's present reality existing simultaneously. The amber room and this room, the tasting table and these 2 chairs, the 3 seconds of her hand on his last night, and the 18 inches of charged morning air between them now. "What happened after that?" she asked. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed something she hadn't known he had. A folded piece of paper, smaller than the napkin, creased into quarters. He looked at it for a moment before opening it. "I found this in my jacket pocket while you were at the desk," he said. He held it out. She leaned forward and took it, opening it carefully. It was a page torn from the tasting room's small leather-bound guest book. She could tell from the format, the lined cream paper, the faint printed header. It was filled, both sides, in handwriting that shifted between his and hers, with the organic irregularity of 2 people passing a pen back and forth across a table over the course of a long, unhurried conversation. She read it. He had written at the top in the measured script she'd come to know this morning. "The question is whether the original intention survives contact with circumstance. Most intentions don't." Her reply below. Most intentions aren't tested seriously. The ones that survive aren't the strongest. They're the ones that were honest to begin with. His, underneath, the letters slightly looser. Honest intentions can produce catastrophic outcomes. The honesty doesn't dignify the damage. Hers, quickly, the pen pressure heavier. No, but it changes what repair looks like. Dishonest damage is permanent. Honest damage can be worked. A gap. Then his again, different somehow. She could feel, looking at the letters, that something had shifted in the room between this line and the one above. Do you actually believe that? Not a question mark. The absence of it deliberate, she thought, not asking whether she believed it intellectually, but whether she meant it, whether it was principle or consolation. Her answer below was only 3 words. She had apparently dispensed with full sentences by this point in the evening. "About you?" "Yes." She stopped reading. The paper rested in her hands, the warm weight of it, and she was in the amber room again with absolute fidelity. She remembered writing those 3 words, remembered the moment before writing them when she had known exactly what she meant and had chosen, against the entirety of her habitual caution, to mean it on paper where it couldn't be unmade. She remembered putting the pen down and looking up, and finding him looking at her with an expression that had no name she could access from her existing vocabulary. She refolded the paper along its creases. "I meant it," she said. "I mean it now." The stillness that followed was different from all the other stillnesses of the morning. It had a different quality, not the static of suppressed tension, not the careful management of proximity, not the structured silence of two people avoiding, but something that pressed forward rather than holding back, something that had direction. Granger, her name in his voice, but different from every prior use of it today. Not flat, not habitual, not the default of long-established distance. Something that carried, barely audibly, the shape of a question he wasn't asking with words. "I know," she said, because she did. He stood from the chair. Not abruptly, with the same considered quality all his movements carried, but with an intention that hadn't been present in any of his movements this morning, a forward direction that the day hadn't had until this moment. He crossed the 6 feet of carpet between their chairs. He stopped in front of her, and she tilted her face upward to keep his gaze. And in the full morning light of room 14, with London moving outside the window, and the evidence of last night arranged on the desk behind her, she saw his face without any of its architecture, without the managed composure, without the careful distances, without the practiced indifference that had taken her years to stop reading as contempt and start reading as protection. What was underneath it was not what she had expected. It was not dramatic. It was not performed. It was simply a man looking at a woman with the specific attention of someone who has stopped pretending not to. He reached down and picked up her hand from the chair arm. Not the brief surface contact of last night. He held it, her hand in both of his, the warmth of his palms, the slight roughness of his thumb moving once across her knuckles, with a gentleness that had no defensive cover over it whatsoever. She felt her breath change pace. "I've been," he said, and stopped. His jaw worked slightly. "I have not been good at—" "Neither have I," she said. His thumb stilled. The morning held still with it. She turned her hand in his and laced her fingers through his fingers and felt him grip back, not tightly, but with a sureness that was entirely without ambivalence. And she looked at their hands and then at his face and found him already looking at her. And the thing that moved between them in that moment was not electricity and not shock and not any of the dramatic vocabularies of unexpected feeling. It was recognition, quiet, thorough, long overdue. "I remember the rest of last night," she said softly. "So do I," he said. He didn't move. She didn't move. His hand held hers in the morning light, and outside, London was fully awake now, indifferent and continuous, and somewhere in the recovered amber room of the previous evening, they were still sitting across a small table with the ghost of her hand on his, and everything still arriving. And here in the present they were already past it, already somewhere further, standing at the threshold of whatever honest damage and honest repair looked like, when two people finally stopped performing for each other. She felt his grip tighten, almost imperceptibly. She did not pull back. Neither did he. The rest of the night came back in the order it had happened. Not all at once, not the dramatic flood she might have expected, the memories reconstituting themselves in a single overwhelming wave. Instead, it arrived the way the morning light had arrived through the curtain gap. Incrementally, each new degree of illumination revealing only slightly more than the last, the room assembling itself by inches. She was still in her chair. He was still standing before her, her hand held in both of his, and the memories came while they stood like that, as though the contact itself were the condition required, as though her fingers threaded through his were the specific key the lock had been waiting for. The tasting room, later, after the guest book, after About You, yes. He had looked at those 3 words for a long time. She remembered watching him read them, the slight movement of his eyes, down and then still, the quality of his stillness different from its daytime version, looser at the edges, the Odessa having done its quiet work, the amber room having done its quieter work still. He had not said anything immediately. He had picked up the pen and held it over the paper, and she had watched him decide not to write whatever he'd first considered, and then decide again, and then put the pen down without writing anything at all. What he had done instead was look at her. Not the managed grey attention she knew from school, from ministry corridors glimpsed across rooms, from this morning's careful inventory of each other. Something prior to management, something that lived underneath the years of constructed distance and had apparently, in the amber light with the memory moss working its patient dissolution, decided to surface. She had not looked away. She remembered this, the specific quality of holding his gaze across that small table, the tasting glasses between them, the bottle 2/3 empty, the rest of the room gone to peripheral irrelevance. She remembered thinking, with a particular clarity that sometimes arrived at the end of a long evening when the ordinary defenses had worn through. I have been misreading you. Not in the simple sense of misjudgment, the correction of a single error, in the larger sense, in the sense of having possessed a text for years and passed it through the wrong grammar, and suddenly, in the amber room with the Odessa and the guest book page and the small truth of 3 words, finding the correct one. I have been misreading you for 20 years. She hadn't said it, but she had thought it loudly enough that she wondered now whether he had somehow heard it across the table. The end of the tasting, she said. The sommelier. She came to close the room, he said. His thumbs moved against her hand, a slow tracing of her knuckles that she suspected he was not fully aware of. We were the last table. I remember the look she gave us. Indulgent, Hermione said. Knowing, he said. There's a difference. There was a difference. She'd seen both in the waiter this morning. The indulgence when he'd described them as the last to leave. The something else in the way he'd said lovely to see you both. As though they had been, to his professional eye, a legible thing, a recognizable condition. She filed this alongside the rest of the accumulating evidence and felt it change the picture. We came upstairs, she said. I have that. The corridor, the lift. You had the room key. You'd left your clutch on the table in the tasting room. His voice was even, recounting. You went back for it. I waited in the lobby. When you came back, you were... A pause, something almost warm entering the careful flatness of the memory. You were arguing with yourself. I do that. Audibly. I remember being uncertain, she said, which was the honest version of I was terrified, which she was not yet prepared to offer. About coming upstairs, about the room. You said so, he said. In the lift. You said you weren't certain this was... He stopped, apparently searching for the word she'd used. Wise, she supplied. Wise, yes. And He stopped again. This time the pause was longer, and she felt his hands shift slightly around hers, a fractional adjustment, as though re-establishing grip. You said... She reached for it, the memory arriving now with his hesitation as its stimulus, the familiar stimuli principle working in both directions, each of them triggering the other's recollection. You said that wisdom was possibly overrated as a criterion. I said that wisdom was frequently indistinguishable from cowardice, dressed in respectable vocabulary. His mouth curved barely at the corner. You told me that was the most Slytherin thing I'd said all evening. It was. You laughed. She had. She remembered the particular quality of it, surprised out of her, genuine in the way laughter was when it arrived before you could decide whether you wanted to give it. The lift and his dry delivery, and the sudden release of 2 hours of tension into something that was not tension at all. You smiled, she said, when I laughed. Silence. Did I? He said, not denying it. Something softer than that. The quality of a man hearing a thing about himself that he cannot verify and is not certain how to carry. A real one, she said quietly. Not the... She paused, choosing. Not the ones you use when you want to appear at ease. An actual one. It reached... She stopped. Don't, he said. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had no prior language for. Not the complicated water grey of the morning's careful distances, but something that had given up the distance entirely, that was simply present, unmediated, slightly undefended, in a way that she suspected cost him considerably. Don't describe it, he said. I can't. His jaw tightened once, briefly. Not yet. She understood. There were things that could be survived as experience, and not as description. Things that once named became suddenly too large for the room. She nodded, did not describe his smile, and held the knowledge of it privately instead. We came in, she said, moving forward. The room, he confirmed. She had it now fully, opening the door, the room exactly as it was now, except for the evidence of occupation, the night beyond the curtains, the lamp on the desk casting its narrow warmth. She had sat in her chair, this chair, and he had poured water from the minibar, because they both apparently arrived at the simultaneous conclusion that the evening had taken sufficient advantage of their faculties, and he'd placed a glass on the table beside her with the same unhurried precision he applied to everything. They had talked. This was the part that came back with the most clarity, the most texture. Not the tasting room's philosophical debate, not the napkin's statutory argument, but this, the room, the lamplight, the water, 2 people in the deep end of an evening with all the usual structures dissolved, talking in the way that was only possible when it was very late and very quiet, and you had already, without quite noticing, stopped performing. He had told her about the first year after the war, not the trial. She knew the trial. Everyone knew the trial. The year after. The specific quality of moving through a world that had reorganized itself around an outcome he'd been on the wrong side of, and finding, in the wreckage of everything his family had constructed its identity upon, the unexpected and almost unwelcome discovery that he was not, in fact, nothing without it. She had told him about the year she'd spent after the war not sleeping, the specific texture of 3 a.m. in her flat, the ceiling above her bed, her ceiling with its familiar crack, and the thoughts that arrived in those hours that had no place in daylight. The names she kept, the things she had not been able to prevent, the particular weight of having survived something that others hadn't, and the complicated arithmetic of continuing to live inside that fact. He had listened with his full attention and had not offered comfort in any of its usual forms. No reassurances, no deflections towards silver linings, no instinct to resolve what she was describing into something more manageable. He had simply heard it. And this, she thought now, holding his hand in the morning light, the memories settling into place around her like sediment clearing from water. This had been the thing. Not the Odessa, not the amber room, not even the 3 words on the guestbook page. This had been the thing, being heard without being managed. "I told you about the nights," she said. "Yes." His voice was quiet and careful. "You didn't try to." "No." She looked at their hands. His fingers, longer than hers, the silver ring she'd noticed this morning on his right hand. She could see it properly now, a thin band with a small inset emblem she recognized as the Malfoy secondary crest, worn on the 4th finger, not as declaration, but as habit, she thought, as continuity, as the particular stubbornness of a man who had decided to carry his history rather than discard it, to bear its weight rather than pretend it didn't exist. She thought about the visits to his father. Every month, alone, telling no one. She thought about the napkins question, whether honest damage could be worked, and her own answer, and meant it again, here, in the full light of the morning, without the amber room's atmospheric assistance. "After that," she said, "we were quiet for a while." "Yes." And then she reached for it, the lamp, the water glass, the gradual thickening of the silence from conversation's aftermath into something else, something that had its own kind of pressure, not uncomfortable, but present, like the moment before weather broke. "You moved your chair." The memory arrived complete as she said it. He had stood and moved his chair, not dramatically, not announcing the gesture, simply placing it differently, angled closer, the way you adjusted furniture when the distance it created had become unnecessary. He had sat back down, and the space between them had been half what it was. And he had not explained this, and she had not asked him to. She had looked at him in the lamplight, and then she had done something she was only now, in the full morning, fully accounting for. She had reached up and touched his face. Not impulsively. She was not an impulsive person, and the Odessa had taken the edge from many things, but had not taken this. She had reached up with the back of her fingers and touched his jaw, the left side, lightly. The way you might touch something you had been looking at for a long time and had only now been given permission to approach. He had gone entirely still, that profound, held stillness, his eyes on hers, and she had felt the warmth of his skin and the faint tension of his jaw beneath her hand, and the specific quality of a moment balanced on its own axis, not falling in any direction. He had turned his face slightly into her hand. The smallest movement, a degree, perhaps 2. but voluntary, deliberate, unmistakable. And then she had withdrawn her hand, and he had looked at her, and she had looked at him, and neither had spoken. And somewhere in the weight of that shared silence, they had both apparently fallen asleep. The lamp burning down, the chairs too far from the bed for the morning to explain, and yet the morning's evidence clear and unambiguous. They had ended up in it together, fully clothed, the duvet pulled toward her side, his arm extended in sleep toward her half of the warmth. She understood now how that had happened. She understood it was not the Odessa. Draco, she said. His name, his actual name in her voice, and she felt him register it, the particular register of hearing a name you associated with a version of yourself you'd set down, spoken by someone who was choosing to address that version directly, to speak to the person rather than the construction. His hands tightened around hers. "I know," he said. His voice had changed, lower, stripped of the morning's careful modulation, carrying something that was simply true. "I know." She stood. The chair behind her, the desk with its evidence, the made bed in the room's middle distance. She stood, and they were close now, the 18 inches of the morning entirely gone, and she could see the open collar of his shirt, and the silver ring, and the slight, rapid movement of his breathing, changing pace. "Last night," she said, "I stopped myself." "I know," he said again. "I'm not going to this time." He looked at her, the full, unguarded, unmanaged look, and she watched something in him arrive at a decision that she understood had been building not just through this morning, but through years of adjacent history, years of wrong grammar applied to a text that had been waiting, patiently, to be read correctly. He lifted his free hand and touched her face, his thumb against her cheekbone. The same gesture returned, given back with the particular significance of an answer to a question asked in the dark, and she felt it move through her from the point of contact outward, warm and certain, and entirely without ambivalence. Neither of them spoke. The morning waited, full of light. His thumb did not move. It rested against her cheekbone with a stillness that was different from all his other stillnesses. Not managed, not protective, not the careful architecture of a man maintaining safe distances. Simply present. The warmth of it radiated inward, and she was aware of her own pulse in a way that was difficult to locate precisely, as though it had distributed itself throughout her body and was making itself known everywhere simultaneously. She looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had been slowly learning to read all morning. Not the complicated grey water of careful attention, not the fractional warmth of almost smiles, but something that had relinquished its distance so completely that it had become simply his face. The face underneath the face. The one that had apparently been there the entire time, behind the years of constructed indifference, behind the school's performances of contempt that she now understood had been precisely that. Performances, armor, the elaborate defensive construction of a boy who had been handed a set of certainties at birth and had spent his adult life discovering, one by one, their inadequacy. She thought about the guest book page, about honest damage can be worked, about her own answer, 3 words, the pen put down with the deliberateness of someone choosing. She thought about the back of her fingers against his jaw last night and his face turning into them, that single voluntary degree. "You're thinking," he said, quietly. his thumb still at her cheekbone. I can see you thinking. I think constantly. You'll have to be more specific. Something moved in his eyes, that ghost of warmth again, closer to the surface now, less easily suppressed. You're building a case. I'm not. She stopped, considered. I may be slightly building a case. For or against. I'm not certain yet. His mouth curved barely at one corner. Not the performed ease she'd catalogued from years of watching him across rooms. Something reluctant and real. The smile of a man who had not intended to find anything funny and had been caught by it anyway. That's honest, he said. I'm trying to be. She held his gaze. It's more difficult than it should be. For which of us? Both, I think. He was quiet for a moment. His thumb moved, finally, one slow arc along her cheekbone toward her temple, and she felt the precise path of it with the concentrated attention of someone committing a thing to memory. He was doing the same, she thought. The slight focus in his eyes, the quality of his attention, a man who understood that some moments were finite and that attention was the only form of keeping them. Last night, he said slowly, when we were talking, after I moved the chair. He paused. You asked me something. I don't... He frowned, reaching. I have most of it, but that part is still... I asked you why you came to the landing, she said. The memory was fully present, complete and clear. At the gala. Why you came to stand beside me. His hand stilled against her face. Yes, he said. And you said... She kept her voice careful, even, the voice she used when the material she was handling was fragile. You said you didn't know, that you'd been across the room and you'd seen me stop on the staircase, and you had crossed to me before you'd made a decision to do so. He looked at her steadily. That's accurate, he said. And then I asked you. She felt the amber room again, the lamp, the close chairs, the water glass. I asked you how long that had been true, moving toward me before deciding to. The quality of the silence that followed was extraordinary. She felt it in her sternum, a low resonant pressure, the sound a bell made, not when struck, but in the moment before. Potential, gathered, the air already knowing what was coming. And I didn't answer, he said. No, because I fell asleep. She said it quietly, with a slight self-deprecating edge of a person acknowledging an impeccably timed failure. Apparently, I find your company soporific. The corner of his mouth moved again. This time it reached further, not quite a full smile, but the clear intention of one, the shape of warmth before it committed to itself. You were asleep in approximately 40 seconds. I've never seen anything like it. I haven't been sleeping well. You told me. His voice softened slightly on the admission, as though the information was still tender. 3 a.m. and the ceiling. Yes. You slept well last night, he said. Simply. She felt the truth of it. She knew it without the evidence of the made bed or the morning's lack of exhaustion. She knew it in the particular way the body knew what it had been given that it had been needing. She had slept, fully and without the usual restless arithmetic of her worst hours. And she had woken to an unfamiliar ceiling and a foreign room, and this man asleep beside her. And her first response, beneath the shock, beneath the inventory of evidence, beneath the frantic reaching for explanation, had been a residual physical ease that she had not had the morning context to identify. She identified it now. I did, she said. He looked at her, the hand at her face still. the morning around them still, the entire room seeming to pause in the manner of held breath. "Answer it now," she said. The question. Granger. Hermione. She said it without thinking, and felt the word change the air between them the moment it left her. Not her schoolgirl name, not the habitual distance of surname, but her actual name, the one that meant she was asking him to speak to her directly, to the person, not the accumulated history. "Answer it." He looked at her for a long moment. She watched the decision move through him, not the practiced deliberation of his public self, the managed considerations of a man who had learned to present only what he'd pre-approved, but something more real and less comfortable, the actual process of a person arriving at honesty through genuine uncertainty. "A long time," he said. The simplicity of it arrived with more weight than elaboration could have carried. "Define long," she said, because she was, after everything, still herself. Something broke in his expression, not painfully, but with the quality of something releasing that had been held too long, a pressure equalizing. His eyes warmed in a way that altered his entire face, and she understood suddenly and with absolute clarity that this was what she had been looking at all morning without being able to name it. This was the face that had been waiting underneath the morning's careful management, the thing the amber room had begun to uncover, and this room, this morning, this accumulated honesty had finished. "Since 8th year," he said. "Specifically since the night in the library when you argued Flitwick into extending the restricted section hours for independent research. And you were so incandescently certain you were right that I forgot to be anything other than—" He stopped, and the pause was not evasion, but search, genuine and visible. "Arrested," he said finally. "I forgot to be anything other than arrested." She stared at him. 8th year, 9 years ago. 9 years of adjacent history, of ministry corridors and shared social circles, and the deliberate maintenance of comfortable distance. And underneath it, beneath all of it, this. A night in a library, and a word he had apparently been carrying with singular patience for nearly a decade. "You never," she began. What would I have said? Not defensive, simply the honest shape of the impossibility, offered plainly. "Granger, think about what I would have had to say, and what I was, and what you had every right to think of me, and tell me what the sentence would have been." She thought about it. She thought about the years post-war, the careful navigation of what had been done, and by whom, and the long, gradual work of determining which people the war had changed and which had merely been made temporarily cautious by consequence. She thought about her own assumptions, the ones she'd carried without examining, the grammar she'd been applying to him for 20 years. She thought about being wrong. "I would have listened," she said. "If you had, you wouldn't have. Not then." He said it without accusation, the flat accuracy of retrospect. "And I wouldn't have blamed you. But now," he said, "we're in a hotel room having reconstructed the evidence of an evening that someone else arranged because they apparently had more confidence in the outcome than either of us." A pause. "And you're looking at me like—" He stopped. "Like what?" she said. His jaw moved once. The hand at her face shifted, his palm coming to rest fully against her cheek. Warm, steady, the silver ring cool at the edge of her jaw, and she turned into it as she had turned her face last night, that same involuntary, voluntary degree. "Like you've stopped deciding," he said quietly. The accuracy of it struck her clean and direct, below every defense. She had been deciding all morning, building cases, weighing evidence, applying the careful analytical architecture she used for everything, every problem, every question she didn't immediately know the answer to. She had been deciding about him since she'd opened her eyes to find him asleep 6 inches away. And somewhere between the desk evidence and the breakfast room and the recovered amber room and the hand in his and his thumb at her cheekbone, she had, apparently, stopped. Not because she had reached a conclusion, because she had recognized that some things were not conclusions. Some things were simply present, simply true in the way that facts were true before you decided what to do with them. The fact of him standing before her in the full morning light, palm against her face, his expression carrying the particular dignity of a man who has said a true thing and is prepared for whatever arrives in response. The fact of her not moving away. "I've stopped deciding," she confirmed. His breath shifted. She saw his chest move with it, the slow exhale of something long held. "Hermione," he said, her name in his voice, his actual voice, the one that had nothing to do with management or performance, or the careful social calibration she'd watched him apply to every interaction this morning, except the ones in this room. Her name spoken as though he'd been holding it for a while and had only now determined that the moment had arrived to use it. She felt it move through her from her name's syllables outward, warm and specific and unmistakable. "I'm here," she said, softly. "I'm not leaving. I'm not pulling back. I'm here." All of it contained in the 2 words, and she felt him hear all of it. His forehead dropped to hers. The gesture arrived without preamble, gentle and complete. His forehead against hers, the warmth of his breath, the proximity, the specific gravity of 2 people who had spent an entire morning slowly eliminating every manageable distance between them, finally arriving at the one that remained. She closed her eyes. She felt the morning around them, the London light through the curtains, the distant city, the small brass chandelier overhead, the desk with its evidence, the made bed, the cold fireplace, the 2 chairs angled toward each other, the bottle of Odessa Reserve that had dissolved their defenses and returned their memories and given them back an evening that someone with better confidence in them than they'd had in themselves had arranged. She felt his breath against her face, his palm against her cheek, his thumb tracing the same arc again, slower this time. She felt the question in all of it, not insistent, not urgent, but present and patient and absolutely certain of itself. She lifted her chin fractionally, the smallest movement, a degree, perhaps 2, her answer. He made a low sound, barely a sound, more the shape of 1, the breath of a man who has arrived somewhere he had not been certain he would be permitted to reach. And then his other hand came to her face, cradling it, and the distance that remained between them, which had been growing smaller all morning from the first moment she turned her head on an unfamiliar pillow and found him asleep beside her, reached its end. He was going to kiss her. She was absolutely certain of it. And the absolute certainty of it was the last clear thought she had before the morning shifted on its axis, and everything that had been building since a night in a library 9 years ago, since a staircase landing and a portrait of Dumbledore, since an amber room and a guest book page and 3 words written without hesitation came, finally and completely, to the place it had always been intending to reach. He kissed her the way he did everything that morning, with complete attention. It was not the kiss she might have constructed in hypothesis, not urgent, not the release of long-compressed feeling finally given permission, not dramatic in any of the ways she might have anticipated. It was slow and certain and warm, his hands holding her face with a care that was almost unbearable in its deliberateness, as though he had decided that if this was happening, it would happen fully, that he would not half do it, would not allow it to be something that could later be attributed to the momentum of the morning or the residue of the Odessa, or the peculiar hothouse intimacy of a hotel room and a reconstructed night. He was making it unambiguous. She felt his intention in the quality of it, the unhurriedness, the steadiness, the way his thumbs moved against her face with the same careful attention his hands had given everything this morning. The silver ring cool at her jaw, the warmth of his palms, the soft, specific pressure of his mouth against hers, and the feeling that moved through her in response was not electricity, not the sharp voltage of shock, but something slower and deeper, the way warmth moved through cold stone, from the surface inward, gradual and absolute, changing the temperature of the thing itself. She kissed him back. Her hands had found his jacket lapels without her having directed them there, and she held on with the loose grip of someone who has decided, without drama, not to let go. She felt him exhale against her mouth, that same low sound, barely a sound, the breath of arrival. His forehead had not moved from hers, and when the kiss ended, which it did slowly, by degrees, the way good things ended, not cut off, but resolved, the last note of a chord allowed to finish, he stayed there, his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breath warm against her lips. She kept her eyes closed too. The room held them in its morning quiet. London moved outside, indifferent and continuous. The curtain gap laid its gold line across the carpet, wider now, the day fully committed to itself. She thought, there it is, not triumphantly, simply, recognizingly. The way you felt when a word you'd been reaching for finally arrived and you thought, yes, that's the one. That's what I meant. He drew back fractionally, and she opened her eyes and found him already looking at her. The grey eyes fully present, carrying an expression she had never seen on his face in 20 years of knowing him, and which she now understood she had never seen, because it had never, until this moment, had occasion to exist. It was unguarded in a way that went past the morning's incremental openings. It was the face of a man who had put down something very heavy and was discovering, with some surprise, that he could stand without it. "Hello," she said, because it was the only word that felt accurate. Something moved through his expression, across his eyes into the corner of his mouth, warm and reluctant and completely real. "Hello," he said. She became aware, in the aftermath of the kiss, of the accumulated weight of the morning, the early waking, the shock, the 3 hours of careful reconstruction, the memories returning in their increments, the evidence arranged on the desk, the growing constellation of small recovered truths. She was, she realized, tired in the specific way that came not from physical exhaustion, but from the sustained effort of being very honest for a very long time. She stepped back, gently, and his hands lowered from her face with a reluctance she felt in their slow release, his fingers trailing briefly along her jaw before dropping to his sides. She moved to the window, drew the curtain back. London assembled itself below her. The Wizarding Quarter's particular streetscape, the narrow cobbled lane, the brass-lamped shop fronts not yet fully open, a tabby cat moving with sovereign unhurriedness along a windowsill 3 buildings down, ordinary, continuous, entirely unaware that anything of significance had happened in room 14 of the Orin Hotel on a Tuesday morning in early spring. She heard him come to stand beside her, not touching, simply present, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, the specific gravity of his proximity, which she was apparently going to have to recalibrate her entire nervous system to stop registering as remarkable. "There's someone," he said, "who arranged last night. Ginny," she said, "and Harry, I think, possibly with assistance. Weasley and Potter." A pause. "I find I can't be angry about it." "No?" She watched the tabby cat reach the end of its windowsill and sit with enormous dignity to survey the lane. "Neither can I, which is probably exactly what they were counting on." "Insufferable," he said mildly. "Both of them. Deeply." She glanced at him. "They're going to be unbearable when they find out. Assuming we tell them. Ginny will know the moment she looks at me. She has a specific face she makes when she's right about something. I've been watching her make it my entire adult life." He looked at her steadily. "And are you going to give her the opportunity to make it?" She turned from the window to face him fully. The morning light found him without mercy, every plane of his face rendered in clean and unambiguous terms. The strong line of his jaw, the silver fair hair still slightly disordered from the night, the open collar, the silver ring, the expression that was still carrying its new openness with the careful balance of something recently learned. She thought about the landing on the ministry staircase and the portrait of Dumbledore and the presence that had arrived beside her before she'd known who it was. She thought about Arrested and a night in the library 9 years ago that she barely remembered, and he apparently hadn't forgotten. She thought about the guest book page and honest damage and 3 words written without hesitation. She thought about the amber room, the warmth of it, the way it had felt to be heard. "Yes," she said, "I think I am." Something settled in his face. Not relief exactly, something more composed than relief, more considered. The particular quality of a man who has asked a question he was genuinely uncertain of the answer to, and has received one that reorganizes something in him. "All right," he said. She looked at the desk. The evidence. The receipt with its margin note, "You shouldn't walk alone." The program with its 2 clipped tickets, the cocktail napkin with its 2 columns of handwriting, and the likewise at the bottom, the guest book page with its careful recorded argument and 3 words at its end. "I'm going to keep the napkin," she said. A beat. "I kept the page," he said. She looked at him. He met her gaze with the directness that had been arriving incrementally all morning and was now, apparently, his default. Or perhaps, she thought, it had always been his default, and she had simply never been in a position to receive it. She crossed to the desk and picked up the napkin, folded it with her usual precision, and tucked it into her clutch beside the program. He watched her do it with his hands in his jacket pockets, jacket buttoned again, the assembled version of himself, present but different now. The same components, the same surface composure, but something behind it that she could see when she looked directly, that didn't hide when looked at. She checked her wand, her ministry identification, the folded receipts she'd been meaning to clear out for weeks. "What happens now?" she said. Not to him, exactly, to the question itself, to the morning. "Now," he said, "you have work." "I do," she turned. "And you." "A meeting at 11, the leaky acquisition discussion." He checked the silver watch. "I have 40 minutes. She looked at him across the room, her chair and his chair, and the two glasses and the Odessa bottle between them, the made bed, the cold fireplace, the brass chandelier, the gold curtain gap line across the carpet, the entire geography of the morning arranged behind him like a landscape they had traversed together without maps. "Draco," she said. He looked at her. "Last night, when I said about you, the honest damage." She held his gaze. "I meant the whole of it, not just the damage, the other part too." He was very still. "The repair," she said simply. She watched him receive this, watched it move through the careful architecture of him, watched it find the places the morning had opened and settle into them with the quiet permanence of something that intended to stay. His jaw moved once. His hands had come out of his pockets and were at his sides, and she could see the slight movement of his fingers. Not fidgeting, not his controlled deliberateness, but the small involuntary motion of a man absorbing something larger than he'd prepared for. "I know what you meant," he said. His voice was low and even, and carrying its new quality, the warmth without the armor over it, the thing that had been there all morning underneath everything else. She picked up her clutch, walked to where he stood, stopped close enough that the proximity was deliberate and legible, and neither of them had to pretend otherwise. "Dinner," she said. "Tonight, somewhere that isn't arranged by anyone else." His mouth curved, and this time it completed itself. A full, unhurried smile, real in every particular, reaching precisely as far as it wanted to reach without asking permission. "I'll choose somewhere," he said. "Somewhere good?" "Granger." Her schoolgirl name, but different now, carrying warmth instead of habit, or perhaps the habit had always carried warmth, and she had only now the context to hear it. "I'm a Malfoy. I don't choose somewhere good. I choose somewhere exceptional." She felt her own smile arrive, surprised out of her, genuine in the way the best ones were. "Then I'll make an effort with my hair." "Your hair is—" He stopped, looked briefly at the ceiling with the expression of a man conducting a rapid internal negotiation, then looked back at her. "Fine. Fine," she repeated. "Exceptional," he said, with the precise enunciation of a man making a correction. She laughed, the same surprised, genuine sound from the lift the previous evening, the one that had been startled out of her before she could decide about it. And she watched him receive it with that expression she now had language for, the arrested attention of a man who had apparently been cataloguing this specific sound with some dedication for 9 years. She stepped toward the door. He reached it first, not rushing, simply the longer stride, and opened it, stood aside with a natural ease that was not performance, not the theatrical manners she might have expected from his background, but something that had simply become his way, the instinct to hold a door without making an occasion of it. She passed through. In the corridor, the housekeeping trolley was gone. The cream carpet, the wall sconces, the unhurried Tuesday morning of a hotel operating at its midweek pace. The lift at the corridor's end, brass doors closed. They walked toward it together, and the distance between them was not the negotiated distance of the morning's early hours, not the deliberate, careful span of two people maintaining established boundaries, but the natural proximity of two people who have stopped maintaining them. Close enough that their hands, hanging at their sides, occasionally brushed, and neither of them adjusted to prevent it. At the lift, she pressed the button. The brass doors opened. They stepped inside. Their reflections assembled in the polished doors as they closed. Herself, hair cooperating with reduced enthusiasm as the charm wore thin, dress rumpled beyond the cleansing charm's best efforts, clutch held loosely in one hand, the remains of last night's lip color. Herself, looking, she thought, like someone who had spent a night in an amber room having her assumptions dismantled, and had found the dismantling, against all reasonable expectation, a relief. Him, beside her. Jacket, silver watch, open collar, the assembled composure with its new quality, its new transparency. The ghost of a smile still present at the corner of his mouth, barely, the way warmth persisted in stone after the fire had been banked. The lift descended. She watched their reflections and thought about 9 years and a library and arrested and a staircase landing and someone with sufficient confidence in the outcome to arrange an amber room for two people who had not yet arranged it for themselves. She thought about tonight, about somewhere exceptional. She thought about waking up and what it meant. Not the shock of an unfamiliar ceiling at 6 a.m, but the broader version of it. The waking that happened when something you had been looking at wrong finally clarified. When the grammar corrected itself and the text became suddenly, simply legible. The lift reached the ground floor. The brass doors opened onto the orange lobby. The morning light through the front windows, the waiter crossing with a tray, the quiet, elegant hum of a hotel conducting its Tuesday business with professional serenity. They stepped out together. At the lobby's entrance, the street door propped open to the mild morning, the lane beyond it cobbled and lamplit, and carrying the particular spring air of London, deciding tentatively to be warm, he stopped. She stopped beside him. He looked at her. One full, direct, unhurried look, the grey eyes carrying everything the morning had put there and making no effort to manage it. Then he reached over and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face. Not the careful, functional gesture of the morning's clasp-caught strand, but something else entirely, the back of his fingers tracing the same arc his thumb had traced at her cheekbone, slow and deliberate and entirely without pretense. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," she confirmed. He held her gaze for one moment longer. The weight of it, the warmth of it, the full and unguarded quality of a man who had put down something heavy and had not yet decided to pick it back up. And then he stepped through the door into the spring morning, and she watched him go and felt the warmth of the morning on her face through the open door, and the warmth of his look still present, still specific, still entirely real. She stood in the lobby of the Orin Hotel with her clutch and her wand, and the folded cocktail napkin, and the lavender program, and the receipt with its margin note. And she thought about doors and landings and amber rooms and honest damage and the slow, patient way that some things arrived at exactly where they had always been intending to go. She stepped through the door into the morning. Above her, London's sky was the particular tender blue of early spring, the colour of something beginning. She walked and did not count her steps, and smiled at nothing and everything, and the morning opened before her like a page that had not yet been written, and for the first time in a very long time she was not afraid of what might arrive when she picked up the pen.
This story is not really about memory loss. It is about all the things we remember perfectly and still choose to ignore. We see someone every day, we know their face, we know how they move, we know the sound of them sitting down in a quiet room, and we say nothing because saying something means risking something. Draco and Hermione needed one strange morning to stop pretending. They need to lose their memories to finally see each other clearly. Maybe that is not so different from real life. Sometimes we need something to break, a plan, a routine, a careful distance we build around ourselves before we finally ask the question we were always afraid to ask. This story is about the moment before the question, the moment you stop deciding and just stay, because staying it is own kind of answer. I think we have all stood of that landing, looking at something we loved, pretending we were just passing through, and somewhere on the other side of the room, someone was already walking toward us. We just weren't watching.